The Grim Drive podcast explores mental health through the lens of professional sports and athletes. Pro athletes come forward more and more with stories about their mental health journey, what they have endured, and how they managed to push through, reflecting a mental health stigma that continues to be reduced. Pro athletes also leverage mindset to achieve peak performance, as well as representing and often driving elements of popular culture through the use of social media, technology, and personal branding. This places athletes front and center as role models for people of all ages, giving them a platform to reach many and deliver important information, including information about mental health. Welcome to the Grim Drive podcast, where we explore mental health through the lens of professional sports and athletes. Today, we're going to be discussing momentum in sports. We're going to give some examples of non-sports, or everyday life kind of examples. Maybe towards the end, we'll toss around some topics that relate to how momentum maybe plays a role outside of sports. But, one question, the main question is for today is momentum in sports a real thing? This has always interested me. I've always thought it is. But more recently, I've heard, particularly from a couple different angles. I think I didn't even get articles for this episode, so I apologize. I'll try to look for those, and maybe if I can find any, I can throw them in the show notes once we edit the episode. And with Dimitri's help, as always, thanks. Shout out to Dimitri and the Go Network. We can put those links in there as well. But Bill Simmons, of The Ringer, he has Bill Simmons podcast. I think most people know Bill Simmons if you're a sports fan. Has always talked about how he thinks momentum is a real thing, and yet the analytics guys do not. And I think so. He's definitely very close to analytics people in the sports world, particularly in basketball. I know he's I don't know how I want to speculate how close he is with Daryl Morey, but I know they know each other or they're friendly. I think Daryl Morey being I think he's the GM of the Philadelphia 76ers now, was the GM of the Houston Rockets for a long time. He's the one that made the Harden trade, got Harden from Oklahoma City Thunder, known as a fleecing of sorts. And then, he had really brought analytics, was very analytics heavy into the NBA. Yep. And I know I think every year or whenever the Sloan conference at MIT happens, I think that's based around analytics and numbers in sports and things like that. I think Bill Simmons probably, interacts with a lot of people around that event and people connected to it. So, because he's mentioned it quite a few times over the last 5 years. So clearly he's hearing from different angles that the analytics people just do not think momentum is a real thing. I think it is. I want to kick it to you, John, to talk a little bit about what you think and maybe what are some examples.
Yeah. I definitely think it is a thing. I think I've seen enough examples. I'm not an analytics guy. I've been very clear about that from day one on this podcast, and all of my friends will certainly tell you.
Hold on. You say you're not an analytics guy, and yet you crack the code on roulette.
Well, that's fair. Okay.
I don't know if I'd go so far as to don't shortchange yourself, man.
Okay, that's fair. Yeah, I have cracked the code on roulette. Listen to the previous episode to hear the secret to doing that. So, yeah, certain analytics I can. Analytics in sports is like a triggering conversation for me, and check out any of the group chats with my friends, and you'll see my reactions to some of that. I think mainly because I feel like it takes the personality out of the game and just becomes like a numbers game. And I don't think that that's the real purpose behind sports. And I think that momentum is sort of like an enemy of analytics, right? Because it's not really quantifiable, right? It's like how do you measure the shift of a game without being able to put a number to it. So I think in some regards, I think that's why the two of them don't go together. And, analytics people will say like it doesn't exist. And you know what? I don't know enough about it, and maybe they're right. Maybe numbers wise, there's no way and they can't prove. And there's been enough examples of like the numbers winning over momentum shifts. But I've seen enough examples of things happening. And I bet every person who's listening to this can probably relate to a game or a match or anything or maybe not even with sports, where there was just this feeling you had that something was different about the game, or that some outcome of the game was going to happen based on something that you really couldn't put your finger on, or it just felt like that was the way that it was going. Some Boston-based examples, the Falcons-Patriots
No big deal.
Was no big deal. But you had a sense, right, when you saw Brady's reaction, just steady as
on
always.
both sides in opposite directions, man.
Yes.
Like, right? You could sense that the Patriots were like start really believing, and it was building, and you could sense that the Falcons were playing not to lose. I think just that act, right? Playing not to lose is being defensive, and that is a version of negative momentum, in my opinion.
I agree. And it's also sort of a recognition of like, uh-oh, right? And when you have an uh-oh type of mentality, you are going to play down to that versus we're 28-3 for a reason. Let's continue to doing what we're doing, even though the shifting for the pitch. So, I think that was an example. I think Bruins being down 4-0 to the Leafs and coming back and winning that series was like a massive one. And you knew that was happening. Bergeron, man. Jack Edwards, that was such a call. But you knew it. Right, you knew they were going to score those goals in that. Lucic gets one, and you knew like it didn't know it was going to be Bergeron, but you knew that goal was getting scored. You knew that was happening. And every analytics person would have told you the percentage of them coming back and winning that game was like 0.00, like something.
What was it? 13, 15?
15. You know what? I don't know.
Okay,
somewhere around there. Yeah, because Lucic was still on the team. So you knew that was happening, right? Tides had turned, wave was coming, Bruins were firing. Everybody was locked in. You could tell fans were going crazy. You knew that the environment was set and the stage was right, and you could feel that momentum shift. And if you were to crunch the numbers in that situation, you'd be like, they're down 4. Like, there's no way, right? They can't win. I remember me watching that game and turning it off because I was so upset. I had to just not watch it because I was too emotionally invested in the game, and then coming back and being like, holy smoke, what's happening? And then almost immediately, within 2 or 3 minutes, I was watching them play. I was like, they're going to win this game. It just knew that was going to happen, despite the analytics probably telling you couldn't, right? Another example, again, we're reliving the glory ones, of course, but Red Sox down 3-0 to the Yankees and coming back and winning that series. Yeah. That's a big one, 0-4.
Yep. The steal, Dave Roberts' steal really shifted things.
Right? And you could, a couple of the Ortiz home runs were big momentum shifts. And you just, again, people in Boston, there was a feeling people kind of no one really say it. No one would dare say they're going to win this, but everybody was feeling like something's happening there. And so I definitely think that it's absolutely a contributing factor. I think how people respond to that shift, there's a energy shift that goes on when something happens, and how you harness those emotions that goes into that is really important. And I think that that's not something that you can really quantify. So I think we've seen enough examples to understand that it is a thing. And I'd be really wary and apprehensive just sort of shooing it away because the analytics disprove it or don't prove it, right? So I think we've seen, like I said, we've seen enough examples of momentum changing the outcome of a game. Hockey's a really great example of seeing momentum shifts, with either with fighting or with goals or a great power play kill or something. Usually you can see the bench looks different. Everybody kind of looks different. It's an interesting thing, and you can't sort of be like, okay, yeah, they're dialed in, or 15% of the team is now 30. I don't know. I guess I have a hard time understanding that.
Well, I would wonder if they've even looked at that specific one. Is kind of, I'm glad you brought it up because it kind of sticks out as one where I would, if I was an analytics person and I was trying to figure out does this exist or not, or can I see it through numbers? I think is a better way to phrase it.
Right.
Performance after a hockey fight relative to what was going on before the fight is something I would probably, that's an intervention point, right? A place to intervene and look from a data perspective to see if anything comes up. Maybe they have looked at it. I don't really know. I think the thing that stands out about how you said it earlier, the one word that stood out to me is emotion. I don't think data captures emotion. And then we've had conversations about there's a whole field of people trying to figure out how to use AI and data analysis to help people, whether it's psychologically or emotionally or things like that. And I think the main hurdle they're running into is that you don't see that stuff in data, and especially not on the fly, right? So it's emotion is so complicated, right, that you can't, and it's always shifting, and it is contagious collectively. And so how do you really predict that or understand it in the moment, right, in real time? I don't think you can, and I don't think numbers are going to show it. And I think analytics people are kind of hamstrung a little bit by the fact that they sometimes think that if the numbers don't show it, that it doesn't exist.
I agree.
And that's not the case. I mean, just because you can't see it doesn't mean it's not there.
Yeah,
I mean,
I think baseball is a good example of that. And I'm not going to be able to remember the game that I was watching. And I'm not a very big baseball fan, and maybe it's because it's super analytical and almost unwatchable at points. And there was one example, and this has happened many times, where there was a pitcher, I think it was like the 6th or 7th inning. I think he had like 2 hits, like 10 or 15, like was pitching out of his mind. And really well. And the pitch count, he reached his pitch count, and that was it. Right? Like
a Red Sox pitcher recently had a no-hitter and was taken out in the 7th inning.
So perfect example,
because
right?
Of that, yeah.
How do you do that, right? I for a few reasons, I feel like that's really problematic. One is the person is pitching well, right? I understand, like, you got to protect the arm, you have to protect, like, maybe it's a health concern, but I don't really know. And what that does to the actual athlete who's pitching like a fabulous game, and then it's like, nope, you're done. And there was one example of a game that I was watching that the one I brought up, pitching really, really well, 6th or 7th inning, and hit the pitch count and had to come out. And right then I was like, they're going to lose this game. And because the pitcher was pissed, was pitching really well, having probably one of his better games, had to come out, was mad about it. And that type, to your point, that type of like that felt like a negative momentum shift. Right? That felt like that type of energy, that type of emotion that he was feeling, that disappointment, that anger, that confusion, that disappointment spread. And I think that it was sort of like this ripple effect for the rest of the team, where like that moment, that negative momentum shift happened on the mound, but everybody on the field felt it, right? Felt how, like, is this the right move, right? That little bit of doubt, and then they lost the game.
So this is a great example, because it makes me think of, like, this is how I would kind of characterize the difference between what the analytics guys think, analytics people think and are saying, versus what I think they're missing. And I'm going to circle it back. Everything's coming full circle, Johnny, to your. I know you've said you've cracked the code, and double green is the way to beat roulette. Spoiler alert. Still go listen to the last episode. But Johnny's big revelation is that he cracked the code on roulette, and that all you got to do is bet on double green. Okay, so. As a stipulation, we are not financial advisors, and this is not financial advice. Please don't go put a ton of money on double green.
Yes.
That being said, analytics guys would kind of come at it from this example. On a roulette board, part of what makes you, as a gambler, as a consumer, fall victim to the real odds with the roulette that are not in your favor, is that you look at that board that has the numbers on it, and when you see 9 reds in a row, what do you think?
Red.
Black.
Black.
Next one's
right.
Black.
Gonna flip it up.
9 reds. It's bound to flip.
Yeah.
And what you don't realize, what the analytitic people, I don't know why I keep saying guys, what the analytics people realize is that doesn't matter. Right. It's a 50-50. Well, I may get less than 50.
Less than 50.
Because of the
green,
my
greens.
Green. So maybe it's not even a bit less. It's like, green is the way to go, right?
Yeah.
So it's drastically less than 50. But
that's what I'm saying.
Let's say you got rid of the double greens just for the sake of this example. If you're flipping a coin and it went up heads 10 times in a row, and you're about to flip 11th time, it's still 50-50 that it's going to be tails or heads. It is not more in the favor of tails just because 10 heads just came up. The probability is still the same.
Yep.
What analytics people will say is, in a baseball situation, we saw this in the play. I think we were watching a game last year in the playoffs that we were like, I think it was the Rays and maybe the Dodgers.
Yeah,
it was World Series, where
maybe that was the game. Yeah.
I think it was, because there was a Dodgers manager. I think he still is Dave Roberts. He was last year. Dave Roberts, the same guy who stole the base. This is ironic because like the main guy who stole a base, which shifted the momentum clearly in the Red Sox-Yankees series 2004. So you'd think he'd buy into that, has really become like the poster child manager for analytics.
Yeah.
Just managing and governing through data and not really doing it based on feel at all. He's someone that in that situation and other situations, he'll look at the roulette thing, right, and be like, oh, 9 reds, I don't care. It's still 50-50. And I think the thing they miss is that this isn't just probability. There are humans involved.
Yeah.
This isn't a coin flipping.
Right.
It's not a ball rolling around with probabilities. There are a bunch of people in a dugout impacting each other.
Yeah.
And that has an effect. And so when you look at a situation in baseball and the numbers are telling you, oh, I got to do this, and some managers swear by this, and I believe them. And they look around, they see the guys, and they're like, yeah, I know the numbers say this, but I'm picking up on X, Y, Z.
Yep.
That matters.
Yeah.
And you can't quantify it, I don't think, in any kind of data, in the moment kind of, exploration.
Yep.
But it has an effect. And 100%. I think if I was a manager, that's the stuff I'd be paying attention to. And you're not always guaranteed to be right.
No.
But I think that matters a lot more than just blindly believing the data.
I agree. I think that analytics people would say that those situations that I brought up, those momentum examples, they would say those are the outliers, right? Yeah. They would say that those are not the majority. But to your point, I think we've talked about like polarities before, but like baseball is the prime example that has just gone way too far to analytics, and they have lost. And I think that it plays a major part. And to a certain extent, like sports was meant to be this place that humans came together to play something that they love to do, right? At its very core and base. And baseball has come so far away from that. And
it's gone to the opposite end of the spectrum. I think like you ever seen Moneyball?
Yeah.
With Brad Pitt?
Yeah.
That book, great book by, who's the author? I can't remember. Man, he wrote Liar's Poker. He wrote, I don't know, great author. Michael Lewis.
Yeah, it is.
Right? Great book, but also they made it into a movie with Brad Pitt. And it's all about Billy Beane and the Oakland A's and how they brought in analytics, right? Because they had no payroll. No
budget,
and they had to do something creative, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so it showed you that whole movie kind of pokes fun at the fact that before that, it's all these scouts who've been around for 30 years, and they're like looking at the build of the guy and like just ridiculous stuff that obviously doesn't play any role in outcomes, okay?
Yeah.
But they just done it for a long time, and so they thought like that's what we do, right?
Yeah.
So it was way too far on that side, but now they've gone to the complete other side where it's like almost 0% feel, emotion, understanding of the guys in the dugout, understanding of like you know that there's moments where a manager can know if they know their players. On a given day, because people are temperamental and they're emotional, on a given day, you might see something early on in the day in BP, in batting practice, or in something else with a guy where you're like, I think today's the day he's really going to lock in.
Yep.
Analytics aren't going to show that.
No.
But you know the person, and that awareness is going to clue you into that, and the data will never show it. So that's, I think I agree. It's gone way too far to the other side.
Yeah, both are highly valuable, right? Of course, you need to know the analytics of the game. Of course, you need to understand like if a shift needs to happen or all those different things.
Yep.
And I don't want to go on the tangent of a shift because I feel like it's kind of destroying the game. But whatever, we won't go down there. But you can tell I have my issues with baseball.
Yes.
But it's. We are so programmed to be like, this isn't working. We got to do the exact opposite, right? And we forget that there were reasons why that was working, right? And we're so quick to jump ship and try a different one that we don't take along with us the stuff that was actually working. We just jump from back and forth.
Yeah.
And analytics and momentum, or just the person, both of them are equally valuable in assessing a game and understanding momentum. And to your point, I think it's a perfect point of like, the numbers are telling me that I have to take this pitcher out, right? However, every single person in this dugout is like locked in on this pitcher, and the pitcher is like dialed in, and everybody is like, he's pitching well. We're on his back. He's doing really well. And what would be the impact if I were to remove that, right? A good manager and a good coach can see that and take that into account. And
which is a hard thing. There are moments where, this is what it does take a talented manager who has a feel for people, because there are moments where stubbornness and denial in the pitcher are going to make them think and talk like they shouldn't be taken out, and the manager has to see, nah, I got to do it.
Right.
And there are other moments where it's exactly like you said, where they got to read between the lines, be like, no, I think he does have it, kind of thing.
Yeah.
And that's all about knowing the people, and it's all about your own personal confidence in yourself as a leader, and the mix of those things. Again, data's not going to show it, but yeah.
And I think the data can act kind of like as a crutch for them in those situations, being like, well, the data told me
scapegoat.
It is. The data told me I had to take that person out, right? Rather than being like, I had a feeling, or I had an inclination, or I had something just felt like I needed to do this. You can just be like, well, the data told me to do it.
Yeah.
Right? And it's just like an easy scapegoat for that type of behavior. So I don't know. I think that there's definitely room for both. And in terms of like, what we're talking about with momentum, I think it's there. I think that analytics would love to be able to disprove it, though.
Absolutely. I wrote some notes about like, I was trying to think in terms of the factors that I think relate to momentum in sports. And so I divided it up in two ways. I divided up individual versus team sports, and I divided up in terms of negative momentum causing factors versus positive momentum causing factors. So from an individual sport perspective, here's what I had. I'll go through the negative and the positive for individual and team sports, and then you tell me what you think. for an individual sport, in terms of the negative factors, I think breathing is one, right? If your breathing becomes off, if you're not focused on it, if you're not intentional about it, shortness of breath, or, you know, if you're panicking and then you're breathing too heavy, that can probably have an impact, I would imagine. Recency bias, right? If you just had one, it's sort of like the roulette effect, right? If you have just had 2-3 bad points, like let's say tennis, for example, points in a row, the recency bias is going to be like those things went wrong. If the person doesn't reset, then that's going to slide them as well. Momentum and / confidence of the opponent, right? So we talked about how, you know, with the Atlanta Falcons and the Patriots, I mean, that's a team sport example, but like, yes, sometimes people have their own momentum, but they also can pick up on the shifting momentum of the people they're playing, and so that plays a role. If you pick up on someone that looks like they got a little pep in their step, all of a sudden, that's going to have an intimidating factor, right? Now, maybe not for pros who just say laser focus, but it could have.
They got to have an awareness that it's happening, right? To be like they're picking up. I got to do the same.
Correct. So it's in their head to some degree. What they do with it might not be a negative slide, but it could be. And then cortisol release, right? When things are not going well, there's stress. Stress equals cortisol release. That has a physical impact. So those are negative factors individually. Positive, I kind of had like adrenaline, flow state, recency bias in a positive way, and then picking up on the other person's negative mindset / momentum. So I think those are all things that, you know, on the negative and the positive side for individual sports. For team sports, on the negative side, I had emotion is contagious, right? We talked about how through a team, through a dugout, through a bench of players, if the emotion is negative and pessimistic and, oh, how do we not lose this? Like the Falcons, right? How do we play not to lose instead of playing to win? That is contagious. And then everyone gets tense and tight. Right, that spreads throughout. We know emotion's contagious. There's actually research that covers how it is. So this is where, like, I'm surprised the analytics guys haven't looked at that, because it's there. There is some research that shows that emotion is contagious. So how could that not have an impact? Right, especially among team sports. There's fear of letting the team down. Right, there's a bond between players often. So if their fear creeps in, like, what if I let my team down? That's not a good mindset to be in. So that creates a momentum shift. Fear of embarrassment. And then also how coaches respond. I think that could be a negative or positive factor. On the positive side, there's an added layer of adrenaline, right? Team praise, things like that can kind of really create the positive effect. There's watching teammates play well, which adds confidence. You see the team playing well. It takes a little pressure off you. And then getting a lead, I think, can lead to momentum, because you start playing with more confidence and more. I would say you're more likely to be in a flow state, because once you have a lead, not always, but you can be in a more confident position where you can just lock into a flow state and not worry about things. Although I think that could probably go both directions, where if you have a lead, you let off the gas too much, or and then you're not focused, or that kind of thing. So I threw a lot at you, but what do you think about that? Yeah, no, I agree. I think, you know, yesterday, and my French family and friends will hate me for bringing it back up, but France, Swiss, and the Euros yesterday was kind of an example of, like, they went down, which was not expected in the first half, and then some momentum shifts. The France saves a PK to not go down 2-0. France comes back a minute later, scores the tying goal, like almost immediately after that, scores another goal, goes up 2-1, 3-1. And it's sort of, they take their foot off the gas a little bit, and then they go on to shootouts and they lose. I'm sorry. I know you guys are probably still processing and working through that. I love you all, but are they France fans? Yeah. So one of my friends is parents are from France. Then I have some family members who are French as well. Oh, so cool. I know yesterday was probably a devastation. So I'm here for you. But I am going to use it as an example of how you can see, like, very clearly that was one of the most recent examples of how momentum can really shift a game, both positive and negative. And I think they fell into the example that you brought up of, I think they took their foot off the gas a little bit of, like, okay, right, we're good, everything's fine, like, don't worry about it. And I think that they got a little bit too comfortable, rather than sort of continuing in the state that they were in, right? Like, keep in the flow state, keep pushing, keep doing what you've got to be doing. And I think they took their foot off the gas and sort of almost went the other way, and the result did not end the way that they wanted it to. So, I think that's momentum is a hard one, and I think when I think about negative and positive momentum, I think it's something important. I think when you hear the best athletes talking about it, they usually talk about it of sort of just like, I have the ability to
be in that state and then actively choose how to respond to it and how do I want to use this different stuff. And Kobe Bryant was the perfect example of someone who spoke about this like all the time. He was sort of just like things just come and go, and I was able to just like sift through and filter what I wanted and what I didn't want and how those things were going. So a shift in the game added some adrenaline to my system. Great, I'm going to use that until I don't need it anymore, or until it becomes a problem. Because just like everything, if you have too much adrenaline, it can actually contribute to being a distracting factor, or too much cortisol. You're not able to think as clearly, so you have to manage those different things. So I think that the most prepared athlete is someone who has the ability to take this information and use it.
I love that example, like being able to it's almost like you have a lot of emotional, psychological data flowing through the air.
Absolutely.
And you have the control and the ability to spot out and latch on to the stuff that you choose to latch on to.
Absolutely.
And then let go when you're done.
Yeah.
Takes a whole lot of skill, but I think Kobe was obviously someone that's very talented at that. And I love that way, that analogy, that way of kind of describing it. If athletes can find a way to tap into that and grab what they need and then discard when they don't, that's a huge advantage.
Yeah. And I mean, we talk about flow state, like when preparation meets challenge, right? And that's just part of the preparation, right? Of like learning to acknowledge the emotions that go into games, and rather than like trying to be this emotionless stoic person, which you might present that way, but you're obviously emotional when you're playing. And if you just discount that or don't prepare for that, you leave yourself vulnerable to like either getting down on yourself or getting too hyped up on yourself. And both of those things can be really negative. It can have negative impacts on you. Or you can be like, wow, things aren't really going well. How do we need to respond, right? You can just take what it is and use that to your advantage, rather than sort of just like being at the will of of your emotions when you're playing. Yeah,
absolutely. And I think, we have to wrap up for today, but I think real quick, a couple real life examples, or I should say non-sports examples that come to mind. Mainly like in relationships, right? If your partner is struggling or if they're negative, that can have a huge effect on a person. In work, I mean, I think who you have as a boss can change momentum. If you have that one toxic workplace teammate, that absolutely spreads throughout the team and can change momentum. So so that is it for today. I want to remind everyone just to, subscribe on YouTube, leave some comments if you have any thoughts or questions about our episodes. We want to engage with people and have a dialogue about some of these things because we're passionate about it. We want to thank everyone for listening to the Grim Drive podcast for this discussion about momentum in sports. We'll be back next week.
Thanks, everyone.